All right, today I want us to look at how to teach our kids to be independent. I get asked a lot, how do you teach your kids to be so independent? How do they do this? How do they do that? And honestly, for me, it was just a goal that I set early on when they were young. So obviously it's a little bit easier if you're working with super young kids and trying to build that independence, but even if your kids are older, this is still very doable. For me, the reason I set this goal was I can remember before I even had kids, I was sitting around with some moms who were older. They had high school students and they were telling me how they had to go home and do all this stuff for their kids. Like they needed to get this ready for tomorrow and they had to do their laundry and make their beds and get their room cleaned up. And I specifically asked, I was like, why are you doing that for your child in high school? Like kids that are getting ready to go to college. And their response was, well, I mean, they just have so much going on, you know, the workload at school and they dance or they play basketball and we just don't want to put too much on them. Whereas I feel like you're doing your child a disservice when you do that. If you can get to where you're teaching your child independence and they're independent and they're having to manage their time and their activities, then that's going to be a skill that carries them all the way through adulthood. Now you might wonder, why do we need to focus on independence, right? Sometimes it's easier, we're busy. It's easy to just go ahead, I'm gonna do this for my kids so we can get out the door. I'm gonna do this real quick for my kids so that we can work on something else or we can move on to the next activity. But there are other benefits to teaching your child independence other than them just doing it on their own. That is definitely one of the benefits, but there's other benefits as well. So I want us to focus for just a second on what those benefits might be. One of the first benefits is that it boosts your child's self-esteem. Think about that feeling that you have when you do something really well at work or you accomplish something that you couldn't figure out. The same is true for our kids. When they are allowed to have that opportunity to be independent and they're successful, we're working on building their self-esteem. They start to have those positive thoughts about themselves. We're boosting their self-esteem just by them accomplishing something. The next is it allows our kids to problem solve. When you're working on your own, say you've started a new job, or maybe you're just trying to figure out something new, you've gotten something new at home, some new electronic, and you're trying to set it up, and you just can't quite figure it out, and you have to take that time to sit there and you have to walk through different steps and different problem-solving strategies just to figure out whatever it is that you're working on. It's the same for our kids. When we're pushing them to independence, we're allowing them to problem solve along the way. The next is it transfers responsibility from us to our child. We're no longer responsible for every little thing that our child is doing. They're learning to complete things on their own, to be independent, which again, we want to continue to grow and grow that skill as they get older and as they're moving towards adulthood and moving out of our house. It decreases stress on you as a parent. The more my child can do independently, the less I'm having to do for them. This can be something super simple that you're doing for your child at a young age, or even more difficult as your child gets older and is growing. The last, it's a building block that's necessary for adulthood. We do not want to have our kids graduate from high school and they've never turned on the washing machine, or they don't know how to load a dishwasher, or they don't know how to pack a suitcase for the weekend. There are skills that they need as they go off to college that we don't want to get a phone call saying, hey mom, dad, how do I do this? We are preparing them to be independent adults functioning in society that don't have to call their parents for everything. So when you're thinking about building independence, sometimes if you just sit back and think about it, it can be a little bit overwhelming. Like, where do I start? What do I begin with? And a lot of people will ask me, okay, what does my child need to be able to do at this age? I don't really look at it as what should they be able to do at this age. I really look at it as skills. What skills does my child currently have? If your child doesn't have one skill, then it doesn't make sense to move on to a higher level skill. So when we're thinking about building independence, I want us to think about skill building rather than kind of meeting these milestones. I want you to focus on lower level skills first, and then we're gonna build upon those. So practically, how do we do that? What does it mean that we're gonna work on skill building? So practically, how do we do that? How do we work on skill building? I'm going to go through a few simple steps that will help you understand how to better focus on skill building with your child. So the first thing you need to do is you need to assess the current level of functioning, or the current level that your child is with a specific skill. Now this isn't a formal assessment, it's not some checklist, it's really just increasing your awareness to what your child is doing throughout the day. So take a few days and sit back and see, hey, what does my child need the most help with? And this is where you're really going to have to focus on you and see, when do you tend to kind of step in and help them? Because as parents, we want to help a lot of times. But see what happens when you kind of sit back Is your child able to do something independently? Are they getting frustrated as they're working on something? If you're seeing that frustration and they can't do something independently, that's how you know, okay, hey, this is kind of where we are. This is where we need to focus. The second thing you want to do is you want to set some goals. What is it that you want your child to do independently? And this is going to be different for every parent. We all have different goals. We all have different things that we want to work on. So really figure out what is it that you want your child to work on. This might be something super simple, like I want them to learn how to unbuckle their car seat when we park the car, or I want them to learn how to make their bed, or I want them to work on how to study for a test. It's going to be different for every family, but figure out exactly what it is that you want to work on with them. If you're having a hard time trying to figure that out, what you might want to sit back and do is make a list of what frustrates you the most. Like, what is it that your kid asks you to do every day that kind of makes you just think, oh my goodness, I'm so tired of doing this? If that's something that you're thinking, that might be a skill that you want to work on, because that's going to help eliminate stress and frustration on both you and your child. Third, you need to choose a skill to focus on. So you've made this list, you've set your goals. A lot of times we get real excited and we're like, okay, we're just going to go all in. You know, it's like your New Year's resolution and you're just going to tackle everything. Really bad plan when you're working on teaching independence, because what's going to happen is when you're teaching independence, you are going to run into some frustration. Your child's going to get frustrated. You're going to get frustrated because everyone's learning something new. So what I would do is choose one thing from that list. Maybe you make that, when you made that list, you pick the most frustrating, or you could even pick the easiest if you want an easy win, and you're going to focus on that one skill. Try not to focus on everything at once. Your child needs a break, you need a break, and what's going to happen is you're going to go all in, and then it's going to implode with frustration. So take your list, then pick just one skill to focus on at a time. Next, you want to take some time to teach the skill. For some reason, this is a step that we tend to skip. We might get frustrated with our kids because they can't do something. We'll talk to our kids about how I want you to learn how to do this on your own, or I'm expecting you to do this on your own, but we never actually sit back and take the time to teach the skill. Super important part of the process. Once you have decided on what skill it is, you have to teach your child how it is to actually successfully complete that activity independently. Now, if you're a teacher, or if you're someone who's maybe like you train people at your job, teaching might come really naturally to you. There's others that teaching is just not something, we're just not built for it. It is not something that we naturally do. So if it's not something that you naturally do, or maybe it is and you're just like, hey, I'm a little bit stuck, I'm going to go through a few steps to help you know how to teach your child and kind of eliminate that frustration along the way. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to break the skill down into smaller steps for your child. Now, this is going to vary based on the age of your child or the skill level of your child, kind of what you do on a daily basis, but you might want to write out the steps to the skill and then teach each individual step. You might be able to group some of those steps together depending on your child, but if it's a child that's cleaning up toys, you know, you might be pick up the toy, put it in the basket, whereas if it's a child that's working on study habits, it might be, you know, make a study guide, make sure you find all the answers, you know, set a timer and study for X amount of time. It can look different for every child, so know that. But if you can break it down into smaller steps as you're teaching, that's going to help your child be more successful. The next is going to be model the correct way to complete the skill. This is a huge thing. They need to see it done correctly. So show your child how to do it. Don't just tell them how to do it. Show them how to do it. You can do that with younger kids as a my turn, your turn. Hey, let me show you my turn. And then they do it. Okay, your turn. Or if it's a, you know, if you have a middle schooler or a high school student, you might just walk them through it and do it for them those first few times and let them kind of interact as you go along, but you're showing them the correct way to do it. After you've shown them, you want to let them perform the task while you give feedback. So now you've already shown them, you've modeled it, so now you're gonna let them do it and you're gonna provide feedback. I think it's really important when you're providing that feedback that you're not sitting there just being like, nope, wrong, you're doing it wrong. Oh, it's all wrong. Don't do that. Nobody wants to hear that. When we're at work, we don't want to hear that. When we're at home, we don't want to hear that. Your kid doesn't want to hear it either. Try to use positive language and tell them how to correct what they're doing. Again, remember, we're not really correcting everything, we're teaching. Like, we're taking this moment to teach them how to do it because our goal is for them to be independent. A big thing to watch for is to make sure that they're not getting too frustrated along the way. If you notice they're getting too frustrated, go ahead and step in and model again. If they're not too, give them some time to try to work through it and do that problem solving. But if you notice you're getting to that point, okay, they're getting really frustrated and they're not wanting to do this anymore, go ahead and step in and help. Go back to that modeling, go back to that feedback. Make sure that you provide reinforcement along the way. If you go back and watch some past videos on why we use reinforcement, that might help you understand that a little bit better. But anytime you want to increase a behavior, you want to increase a skill, you want to pair that with reinforcement. So that's a key part of teaching, is to pair reinforcement with it. The last thing is just to make sure that you monitor your child as they're completing the skill. So once you've taught it, you've broken it down, you've modeled, you've given reinforcement, you see that they're being successful, doesn't mean that you just walk away completely and you're done. You want to make sure that you're following up by making sure they're doing it correctly. Now, for some of you type A moms, it's going to be really hard because you're going to want it like perfect every time. Perfection might not be exactly what you want to aim for. You want them to be successful. They are going to get better the more and more they do it. I can remember when we were teaching our son to mow the grass, he would mow the grass and it would be like, okay, yeah, that's great. But it wasn't like we would mow it necessarily. But the more he did it, the more time he had practice, the better and better he became at that skill. Now, once you've taught that first skill and your child is consistently independent with that skill, that's when you want to go back to your list. Go back to your list and then you can pick the next skill to work on. Because remember, you're only working on one skill at a time. Go back to your list, choose the next skill that you want to work on, and focus on that skill. You still might have to go back and kind of repeat, just kind of check in on that first skill that you taught, but for the most part, before you move on, I want that to be pretty independent, and then you're going to work on your new skill. Same routine, same steps you're going to go through on teaching that new skill. And then once they have completed that second skill, then you want to move on to the third. So you're just gradually going to build upon it. You kind of want to use that +1 approach. Once we learn one, we're moving on to the next one. If you get frustrated, if you feel like, oh my goodness, my child is learning nothing, I would encourage you to go back to that list. Look at your list and see where you started and kind of where you are. And even if you're still on that first skill, what step are you on of that skill? Celebrate those little successes with your child, because every child is going to grow. Every child is going to develop. They're going to become independent at a different pace. Don't compare your child to someone else's child, or even like in your own home. Don't compare this child to this child. Every child grows and learns at a different pace. But I do think that keeping that list for you is going to help encourage you along the way so that you don't get disheartened and think, oh, like, we're not making any progress, and then you give up. Look at that list to kind of help motivate you to keep on going. If you found this video helpful, be sure and like this video and subscribe to my channel so that you know when more videos are posted. You can also, if you're on Facebook, look on Facebook and look for the group Parenting with Less Stress, which gives you more tips and practical ways to help you become a more proactive parent.